Shalom Aleichem, Mishpachim, Boker Tov. It is the first day of Hanukkah. I believe tonight is the first lighting of the candles on the Hanukkah menorah, the Hanukkah. All right, I am coming to you with a new Torah portion where I am in the Torah portion of, and I don't remember, I forgot what it's called, Tzav. There we go, it's called Tzav. In the book of Vayikra. And I'm reading from my Hebrew-English daily studies in Chitas. This is a new addition to Chabad Sefarim. This is the first Hebrew-English studies in Chitas. It is the Schottenstein edition, Kehos publication. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool, wonderful sefer. Or I should say Sefarim. I will read the first reading, the first Aliyah, which is chapter 6, verse 1 through 11. Torah on the bottom, Rashi on the bottom, Torah on top. Chapter 6, verse 1. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the regulation regarding the ascent offering. It remains the same, valid ascent offering as long as it was placed on the fire piled atop the altar any time during the entire night until morning, inasmuch as the fire of the altar will be burning on it throughout the night." Verse 2, Rashi, command Aaron. The term command invariably denotes urging, emphasizing the weight attached to the instruction and that it applies immediately and for future generations. Rabbi Shimon said, Scripture found it especially necessary to urge the command's fulfillment in this way in a case where monetary loss is involved. This is the regulation regarding the ascent offering. This section is written to teach us that the burning up of the fats and the limbs of sacrifices upon the altar is valid if done any time during the night after the sacrifices were slaughtered, not only during that day, and to teach us regarding disqualified sacrifices, which of them must be taken down if brought up onto the altar, and which, if brought up, are not taken down. For wherever the term here cannot carry its simple meaning of introducing new laws, it is inclusive. And thus here it tells us that one law applies to all holy items brought up onto the altar, even the disqualified ones, that if they were brought up onto the altar, they are not taken down. Literally, it is the ascent offering. These words are added to exclude from the aforementioned rule an animal that was used for bestiality and similar cases of disqualification that did not take place in the sanctuary. Animals that were already unfit as sacrifices before entering the courtyard. Even if such an animal was brought up onto the altar, it must be taken down. Verse 3, Torah. Every morning the priest must don his linen tunic, and he must don his linen trousers on his flesh. He must remove the ashes remaining after the fire will consume the daily afternoon ascent offering upon the altar, and deposit them next to the altar. Verse 3, Torah, literally his linen garment. This is the tunic. Why does Scripture refer to it as, in order to teach, as this Hebrew word here, in order to teach us that it must be made to his size, on his flesh. Nothing should intervene between the trousers and his skin. He must lift out the ashes. He would scoop a panful from the innermost coals that had been totally consumed and become ashes and place them on the east side of the altar's ramp. Literally, the ashes that the fire consumed the ascent offering, and turned it into ash. From that ash he must remove a portion and deposit them next to the altar, upon the altar. If he found sacrificial parts that had not yet been consumed, he replaces them on the altar fire after having raked the coals this way and that, and having taken from the innermost ashes, as it says, the ascent offering upon the altar. Verse 4, Torah. He should remove his garments and put on other garments, and he must take the ashes out to a ritually undefiled place outside the camp. Verse 5, Torah. The fire burning on the altar must not be allowed to go out. The priest must kindle wood upon it every morning, and he must arrange the cut-up pieces of the morning daily ascent offering upon it. He must burn up the fats of the peace offerings upon it. Verse 4, Rashi. He should remove his garments. This is not compulsory, but is proper conduct, that while taking the ashes outside the camp, he not soil the garments worn when performing regular service, even that of placing part of the ashes next to the altar, as the garments his servant wears when cooking a pot for the master, he should not wear when pouring a cup for his master. Therefore, he should put on other garments, ones of inferior quality to those used for serving the altar. And he must take the ashes out that were heaped into the tepuach, apple-shaped mound, after they had accumulated, and there was no more room to arrange the woodpile. He would remove them from there. This task needed not be done every day, but the removal of a portion was required every day. Verse 5, Rashi. The fire burning on the altar. Scripture here repeats many expressions of burning on the fire pile. The fire of the altar will be burning on it. The fire burning on the altar. Here and. Literally, a fire must always be burning on the altar. All these verses are expounded in Tractate Yoma, where our sages differed as to how many wood piles there were on the altar. And he must arrange the ascent offering upon it. The continual daily ascent offering must come first. From where do we know that nothing may be brought upon the woodpile before the continual morning offering? Scripture states the ascent offering, the first ascent offering, the fats of the peace offerings. If peace offerings are brought there, our sages, however, learned from here upon it, only with after the daily morning ascent offering, complete all the other sacrifices. We thus derive from here that nothing may be brought after the daily afternoon ascent offering. Verse 6, Torah. The fire used to kindle the lamps of the candelabrum, which must be lit regularly, must burn upon the altar. The fire on the altar must not go out. Verse 7, Torah. This is the regulation of the grain offering. Aaron's sons must bring it before God at the front of the altar. Verse 6, Rashi. Literally, constant fire. This refers to fire about which it says, the one that is used for kindling the lamps, about which it says, to kindle the lamp regularly. It must also be kindled from the fire upon the altar, the outer altar. It must not go out. This command is repeated in order to indicate that one who extinguishes the fire on the altar transgresses two passive commandments. This is the regulation of the grain offering. One law applies to all grain offerings, that they all require oil and frankincense, as stated in this passage. For I might have thought that only a grain offering of an Israelite, from which a fistful is taken, requires oil and frankincense. From where do I know that the same applies to a priest's grain offering, which is completely burned up? Scripture therefore states the inclusive term, the regulation of. Bring it. This refers to bringing the grain offering near the southwest corner of the altar, before God. This is the west side of the altar, which faces the tent of meeting. At the front of the altar. This is the south side of the altar, which is the face of the altar, since the ramp was situated on that side. Verse 8, Torah. The priest must lift out its memorial portion from it with his fist, from the fine flour of the grain offering, as well as from its oil, and all the frankincense that is on the grain offering. He must burn up its memorial portion on the altar with the intention that it be pleasing to God. Verse 8, Torah. He must lift out from it, from a united mass, that the full tenth of an ephah must be together in the vessel when the fistful is removed. With his fist. This teaches us that he may not instead make a measure equivalent to his fistful to scoop the amount from the fine flour of the grain offering, as well as from its oil. From here we learn that he takes the fistful from the place where there is much oil. The grain offering, it must be clearly defined and cannot be mixed with another grain offering. And all the frankincense that is on the grain offering he must burn up. He gathers the frankincense on top of the grain offering after the fistful has been taken and burns it up along with the fistful, since this was only specified regarding one of the grain offerings stated in Parshat Vayikra. It was necessary to repeat this passage here to include all grain offerings as having the same law. Verse 9, Torah. Aaron and his sons must eat whatever is left over from it. It must be eaten as unleavened bread in a holy place. They must eat it in the courtyard of the tent of meeting. It must not be baked leavened, even though I have given it to them as their portion from my fire offerings. It is a sacrifice of superior holiness, like the sin offering and like the guilt offering. Verse 9, Rashi, in a holy place. And which place is this? In the courtyard of the tent of meeting. Verse 10, Rashi, it must not be baked leavened, their portion. This indicates that even the leftover portions are forbidden to be leavened. Like the sin offering and like the guilt offering, a sinner's grain offering is like a sin offering. Therefore, if the fistful was separated with intent other than for this particular offering, it is invalid. A voluntary grain offering is like a guilt offering. Therefore, if the fistful was separated with intent other than for this particular offering, it is nevertheless valid. Verse 11, Torah, every male among Aaron's descendants may eat it. It is an eternal entitlement throughout your generations from the fire offerings to God, of God. Anything that touches a sacrifice of superior holiness will become holy like it. Verse 11, Rashi, every male, even one with a bodily defect that disqualifies him from serving as a priest. Why is this stated here? If merely to permit eating sacrifices, that is already stated regarding such a priest. He may eat his God's food from the sacrifices of superior holiness. Rather, it includes priests with a bodily defect as having his own equal share in the priest's portion of the sacrifices. Anything that touches. This refers to anything sacrificial, any sacrificial meat of lesser holiness or non-sacrificial food that touches the grain offering and absorbs some of its flavor will become holy. To become like the grain offering, that if it is invalid, they too become invalid. And if it is valid, they may be eaten only with the same restrictions as the grain offering. It is the first Aliyah of Parsha. Why am I losing? Parsha Tzav. I'm losing my mind. I don't know which Parsha I just read. Yeah, Parsha Tzav. All right. Let us read from the Daily Wisdom and the Parshiot. It's not this safer, it's this safer. Volume 2. Sixth reading by Vayikra. All right, I will read the introduction to Parshat Tzav. Details of the sacrifices, the installation rites. Parshat Tzav is Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 8, verse 36. The second section of the book of Leviticus is the continuation and completion of the preceding section, opening as God tells Moses to command, to Tzav, Aaron and his sons to follow the procedures for offering up sacrifices. The second half of the section describes the week-long installation rites by which the priests and the tabernacle were inaugurated. All right, the first reading, what I just read, was Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1 through 11. Every morning, one of the priests would be appointed to remove the innermost ashes left from their previous day's sacrifice, depositing them at the foot of the altar. In addition, whenever the remaining ashes accumulated to the point that they prevented the fire from consuming the sacrifices, the priest appointed that day to remove the innermost ashes removed these accumulated ashes as well, depositing them outside the camp. The title of this daily wisdom in the Parshiot is called The Importance of Preparation. God told Moses, the priest appointed to remove the accumulated ashes must take the ashes outside the camp. Removing the innermost ashes was an integral part of the daily tabernacle ritual, whereas removing the accumulated ashes was done solely to make it possible to offer up more sacrifices. Nonetheless, both deeds had to be performed by the same priest. This teaches us that preparing to fulfill the divine commandment, in this case, clearing ashes in order to offer up additional sacrifices, is a bona fide part of our spiritual life, no less than fulfilling the commandment itself. In our desire to connect to God through performing His commandments, we may consider fulfilling the commandments much more important than preparing for them. From God's perspective, however, both the commandment and its prerequisite preparation are expressions of His will. Therefore, when we are focused on God's will as opposed to our own spiritual advancement, we can prepare for the commandment with the same joy and enthusiasm that we experience while performing it. And that is the reading of the first Aliyah of Tzav in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus. Have a wonderful morning. Boker Tov.